because it's when
Like
it's
greens
green.
go. It's not green.
It says it's live.
They're alive. Okay,
See it
thanks,
on the
Tess.
page.
Hello, and welcome to Face to Face Therapy. Oh, I guess we are live. We're double, triple live. Thanks for joining us. Let's see who jumps on here. If anybody jumps on here, we have a super important topic today. Today is actually World Suicide Prevention Day. And I'm here with my friend and colleague, Miss Susie Reynolds Reece, who has dedicated her entire career to suicide prevention. Wow, that was like a lot of words, and I think I said so we're breaking stigma talking about suicide, and I think I just said suicide like 5 times.
Yeah, that's working. That's how you break it down. You keep
Yeah.
saying it.
Yeah, is that part of your
How I
yeah, I'm
my
serious.
approach. Yeah,
I'm
I mean I
serious.
do. Yeah. I don't have an issue shying away from it, which I never really have. But I think that part of that was just because everyone else seemed very scared of it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that it was like the Voldemort concept before I knew that there was a Voldemort concept,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe J.K. Rowling owes me some type of residuals somewhere. Like she knew that I was out there just...
The one we don't speak of.
Right, exactly.
And it's true. I mean, even me, like, this is, I deal with this whole, like, very often with my clients. And I think that's very important for people to realize and to know, like, it's actually one of my favorite doctors. Hi, Dr. Dixon, who pointed this out to me. You can go to Walmart and you're walking around and you think you're the only person in there that's like struggling with mental health, and you feel like you're the only person in there that's struggling with thoughts of suicide, but that's not true. And you may even know the numbers on that. Like, do you know the numbers on that? Like, how many people struggle with thoughts of suicide?
So according to like statistics and research, it's 1 out of 20, about 5% of the population at any given point in time. But, I think right now, that to me, that's for general population. That's not for higher risk populations. And that's not for people that are enduring a pandemic and stress.
Right.
And, so I would say that it's actually a higher percentage.
I would think so. I mean, because I work a lot with trauma and a lot of people with PTSD. And I really feel like out of every group that I work with, that's who struggles the most with thoughts of suicide.
Well, I think trauma exposure is just going to increase that risk anyways, especially if it's not been processed and is not actively being worked on.
Right.
So, and then of course, you have lowered inhibitions, lowered just really access to thoughts that you normally wouldn't have as just someone that's out in the community because of the things that they've endured. So,
you did say high risk population, and I haven't looked at that research lately because I've been in my little trauma world. What is considered high risk right now?
I mean, everyone to me is high
Yeah.
risk right now.
Yeah.
But so I mean, you're
because
looking
of COVID
and it's not just COVID necessarily. It's societal stress attached to pandemic. So, and then you would have additional risk factors of, financial stressors. Some people have lost jobs. Any loss in at all can be a risk factor as well. And then, of course, you've got a lot of people that are very angry. So sometimes anger is a secondary emotion, and there may be some fear underlying that or confusion.
Totally.
People don't like change, and we have just been in a state of constant flux for the past almost a year and a half.
That's a very good point.
Yeah. So, I feel as though that's really contributing, and the way that I look at it is when it comes to suicidality, it's an internalized aggression. And you have those who either internalize or externalize it. And sometimes you have a combination. So we're seeing a lot of anger, which is that externalized. But then depression is that, that feeling isolated, that feeling of disconnection. And kind of like a self-loathing component can be found in that as well. So for me, I've been just telling everyone, like, don't be... I can't say the word that I would normally.
You can say it here.
Okay. Well, don't be a dick is what I've been saying because I think everyone is just like we're all beyond our max at this point. Everyone's operating at a 12.
Right.
And we shouldn't even be operating at 10s at any point.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's why we're seeing so many negative and bad behaviors in the world.
Definitely a lot of people are being dicks. And being a dick can lead to causing someone else to have thoughts of suicide. I only just thought of this now, but 13 Reasons. Have you watched that? Do you know about that?
I haven't seen the last season, but
Yeah.
I was sort of forced to watch the first season, and then I was like, oh, I'll watch the second season. I actually watched it twice. I watched the first 2 seasons, and then I watched the first season again with my daughter.
Okay.
So that I could have a conversation around everything with her.
I love that, and that's actually what I tell people. Like, I think it's not so popular right now, but when it came out, and a lot of people would ask me, like, should I let my child watch this? And I would say, you can watch this with your, teenage child, so that you can be there to answer questions and explain things.
Well, and I was yelling at the television a lot, which I think is like a sign of aging. I'm not sure.
Well, and we love the therapist in that show. We love the therapist in that. It's like the therapist that does everything wrong. We're not even calling him a therapist because he's like a counselor. But anyway, I
don't even know exactly what his.
Yeah,
they
he's
never
like a school
clarified.
Counselor. Yeah, I was
if he was a. I assumed school counselor because I didn't think
he definitely
therapist.
was not an LCSW.
Right.
Like, for sure.
No, yeah, so I definitely watched it a few times. The first time I took copious amounts of notes.
Really? Okay.
I'm such a nerd. It's so bad. And they were all color coordinated. And
good for you.
I still have them. But,
Well, so for me, I love to break down human behavior. And I watched that, and I saw where there was just, and no one knew what the other little group was doing, but there were multiple layers of people being jerks. And that can lead to, especially when you're in a group, like a class or any type of group that you're in, and we call it kind of like scapegoating too, where you just, like, one person sort of gets targeted. And it happens in professional environments, it happens in nonprofits, it happens in hospitals, it happens in therapy offices, I'm sure happens in schools, right?
Of course.
And then it's really, sometimes with some of the stuff I say, it's almost like magic. This would be bad magic, obviously, because you don't really know how it happens. People just start picking on someone or isolating them, and that can lead to suicidality, for sure.
Well, and for that particular, scene, situation, movie, whatever, but, there were multiple factors beyond just the school itself and the setting of having those youth interactions.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's an extreme version of what can happen. I wouldn't say that doesn't happen at all, but I would say that they really, it's entertainment. It's for the purposes of getting you engaged.
Yeah.
She had a lot going on, to say the least, but I think that's the important component, is that it's never just a singular thing.
Yes.
So we often see that what most people refer to as a triggering event. I don't really like that terminology, but we see that one thing that's happened, that breakup, that, they've been kicked out of a club or whatever it is, and that's the thing that's made them this way. And of course, it's that language too. That it made them do this. It made them, But you don't realize, well, there's all these other factors at home. There's all of these other ties. They have predisposition to mental health issues and all of these things, and it didn't make them anything. This is simply a part of the issues that they need to face. So that's kind of what I did with my daughter, I talked about the realism in the show, but then I also said, the adults suck. Let's just put it, and that's not just on TV, like, adults just suck. And I've had multiple conversations with her. I'm like, look, I want you to stand up for yourself, but sometimes we don't listen to you. And if that's the case, I'm an adult and I can put on the adult clothes and pretend to be an adult and go and have that conversation with someone, but we're not going to allow certain things to happen around us and not step in. And I think that's what, to me, was the most notable, because it wasn't all those kids around that situation had multiple things that they should have been like, oh, this happened, let me do something about it. But we often disempower youth, and we assume, well, you're young, you don't know any better.
I think lots of groups get disempowered.
Oh, most definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Women.
Of course.
Yeah.
Asians, I mean, we could just
whatever.
name all of it. Yeah. But I think too,
going.
it's part of it is that can be taught. That empowerment component can be taught.
And disempowering can lead to feeling disempowered. Is, I would say, if you want to call it a trigger. Like, I'm not a big trigger person either. Like, that gets brought up a lot, but we usually talk about, here's my trigger. No, what was the antecedent? Like, what happened the 3 steps before the trigger?
Right.
Because it's building. It's not like you said, it's not like one thing happened.
Well, and that's that self-monitoring component that, let me look at what's going on and try and figure out what's going on.
Right.
Because there's something that does kind of lead to, and I think we don't often do that. We get busy, and and for me, trying to talk to my kids about those things is important because I had no idea about any of that when I was younger, and I had to struggle to figure myself out. I'm like, let me equip you with some skills and tools that I didn't have, because that's what I'm here for. Like, I don't want you to struggle to get to where I am when you could already be there. Be the better version. I have no issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important for adults, parents, whatever, to understand that. That's why these trainings are important, I think. Isn't that kind of like part of your career of suicide prevention is training?
I do a lot of speaking and training.
Yeah.
I feel training is kind of that pivotal point, but it's not where true change normally happens.
No.
So, because really the only way to, there's a couple ways to get some change, is changing attitudes that result in behavior change. You know that, right? But then you have to support that. And that means systemic level change in organizations. We need policies and protocols that support healthier individuals. And that can look like, let's have trauma-informed care. Everyone says that right now. Trauma-informed care, right?
Yeah.
You do trauma care. How many are actually implementing that as an organization?
No. I have purposely been called into organizations to employ trauma-informed care and have gotten beaten down to the point that I'm freaking suicidal myself. Like, seriously, like, I'm not even making a joke. Because they like that fancy word.
Right.
And they want to say, I'm doing this, but then you have to actually do something instead of just say you're doing it. Like, if you're saying that you have, I use this word, I know it's a therapy word, but to explain it, we have what we call like a milieu. And so, like, your therapeutic environment is not just sitting right here on the sofa. It's the lobby, it's the bathroom, it's everyone that we work with and we coordinate with. It's people coming in, media, podcasts.
The physical spaces.
The physical space is the milieu, and it's important. And if you want an environment or space to be trauma sensitive, you are hitting all those layers, right? That's just like, for some reason, too mind-blowing for so many organizations. I don't know why. It doesn't cost money. Most of the time, it doesn't cost money.
Well, but that's that barrier, that mental barrier, that there's a price tag associated with it. Yeah. And so we don't dive into or look at it, and because, it's going to cost too much. It's easier not to do anything, right?
Because it is arduous. It is difficult. Right. You do have to make changes. But that is very, very, very frustrating to me. Sorry, I had to get on my little soapbox about that for a hot minute.
Well, and I think that that's the part, like, when you look at training, that's a component of it. And even our trainings aren't normally great, let's be honest. The ones that how many have you been to and you're just like looking at the clock? The second you get there, you're like, oh, it's 8:05. Okay, I've got how many hours? And then you're like, okay, how many emails can I get away with before they notice that I'm just totally checked out, right?
Yeah, right.
Because you're just like, first of all, what am I getting out of this? How is this any different? Or it's the death by PowerPoint, which for me is just ironic every time when I'm doing suicide prevention, that's what's the standard.
You know what I also see, and like, we haven't planned this. This is totally this is organic, let's say that, right? But it's like people that do, like me, I'm always still wanting to learn. I know I don't know it all. Like, I want to learn from you. I want to grow. I want to expand my mind. But a lot of people get a little bit of training. Like, they'll get, like, say, assist or something, which I love assist, and that's actually helped me in my practice. But then they think they know it all already. And they think that, you know, I talked through 3 people and they didn't kill themselves. And now I am like the rock star suicide. To me, that is very frustrating.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
It's very dangerous because I'm never at any point like, oh, I'm like so amazing at this, and I can't tell you this past couple weeks. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to talk someone through something, and that's not my job. So you know, that's not what I do.
You're a trainer,
right?
And an
but I'm never gonna like be like I'm not going to do this for you, right? I would never do that.
Right.
But at the same point, you know, again, that's not my job. So I would never go into that like, this is like 3005 for me, so you'll be fine. You know, like, we've got this. Because it's never, like, you should just, even 3 is scary. Like, you've done 3 and you're like very confident.
And I was just spouting out.
No, I know, but there are definitely people that are like, oh, well, I've been trained, I know what to do. And you're like, okay. So you know the education behind that process, and you understand. They're just like, what are these words? Like, don't throw these words at me. I'm not trying to, like, put people in a position where they don't feel like they need, I don't want people to feel like they need to be overeducated to help. But at the same time, we need to know where we fall in that chain of ability. And I'm not a therapist. I don't want to do the long-term care. That's not good for me.
Right.
But I know you, I'm going to send them to you because, hey, you have all the skills. You know how to do this.
Right.
You've done that. And you're willing to do that. Whereas, you know, I can do that crisis triage, get you through and get you to the next person. I'm fine with that. But that's it. I don't want to.
Yeah, I am all about sort of like peer recovery and being an interventionist and that being helpful in preventing suicide. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of therapists maybe are not, and that's been some kind of debate. That's not me, because I've seen, and when I've been suicidal myself, I haven't called my therapist on the phone. I've called my friends who I know are trained in assist and who will come and drive and get me at 2 a.m, you know? But even me, that I am trained in that and trauma therapist, whatever, I don't take that on alone. You know what I mean? If somebody comes to me and they have thoughts of suicide, that's when you really got to reach out to all the other experts, you know, like PCP. We make a plan, which I'm not calling it a safety plan, but we make a plan to keep them safe and to get better, which usually involves the family, their work, their PCP, sometimes psychiatry, and literally day to day. And then they're checking in with me 3 to 4 times a day. The type of therapy that I do as a DBT therapist, that's actually part of it. And that's why I don't have a huge caseload. But they should be able to have access to me on a daily basis. I know every therapist can't do that, but you can plan in other things like friends. I guess my whole point of what I'm trying to say, it's not just me either. You've got to have a whole team of support of professionals.
Well, and especially if you're talking about ongoing care, because you know that it's very irresponsible, like, to me ethically, to be like, okay, well, I'll be your only person, we'll be fine, right?
Right.
And then the next thing you know, you were away from your phone for 5 minutes and they called and they spiraled because you were their one support.
Right.
And
that's
so
never good.
That's one of the things, even for someone who's not necessarily in that space as work,
Right.
that if someone reaches out to me, I'm like, well, who else can we tag in? Because, you know, I don't want to be your only person.
And that is kind of part of probably the training that you do as well, right? Don't you?
It's important to me.
Yeah.
I think it should be a component for
Yeah.
sure. And it's not just that, because I've had several calls where someone is calling on behalf of someone they're concerned about, and then
Right.
at the end I say, okay, now let's talk about you. How are you doing? And they're like, literally no one has asked me that, and no one has even asked me to process what all I've just gone through. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize how I was feeling. And I'm like, right. Because when it starts to settle down, then you're like, wow, that was a lot, right?
So this is something new in the DSM-5 because it changed for PTSD. Now it says that you can have PTSD from someone you care about dying by suicide. So it used to be that you had to have the direct threat or whatever, but I think we should be asking those people how they're doing, right?
Tertiary trauma or secondary trauma
Yeah.
is a relatively new field.
Yeah.
And it really only after September 11th is when they really started to study it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we still don't know, not only in regards to suicide loss, but even exposure to other events like 9/11 or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't always know, you know, indirectly how that's impacting those people that weren't necessarily a part of it, but they were definitely impacted in one way
Right.
or another. And I totally believe it, because after my father passed, there were so many things that were rippled out because of his loss that happened, that I couldn't sit down and just tell you, like, on a piece of paper, these are the things, right? I was marginalized because once people found out how he had died and the nature of his loss, they kind of pushed me out, because they felt like some of them felt like it was partially my fault, but then
Like
others
some
were
stigma.
yeah, it was like
kind of.
a leper, you know, this thing that was around me, and so they didn't want to be a part of it. So that was a component. Confusion, child loss, like as a child you don't necessarily understand it, so cognitively, as I started to understand it more, you start to regrieve. So there's all these things that happen.
Can I ask, because I know because we're in the same bubble, your story about this, but I haven't heard you talk about it before.
Okay.
How old were you when this happened?
So I was a little over a month after I had turned 10. So I turned 10 in April, and then my father passed in May.
Okay.
And so, you know, unfortunately, prior to his loss, I had endured a great deal of child abuse from my stepmother. And then prior to that, I was in a natural disaster at a very young age, and then my mom had left. So I had all these things kind of built up before his loss. And then once he passed, I was in a different state, and his parents and my grandparents adopted me in Arkansas. And so that was, it was a lot, because not only had I lost a parent who was my sole caregiver, I was uprooted, and essentially I wouldn't say the same as an orphan, but it was definitely along those lines. And then adopted by grandparents in Arkansas, and I was like the Asian kid in elementary school. So I think when I got to middle school, there was one more, and I think he was Japanese. And then I think in high school we had like 5, maybe a little bit more than that. So that was an interesting
adjustment.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And then to have, you know, grandparents who are like 50 years older than you just can't, you can't talk to them about the things that are happening. You know, when you're like, they're like, why are you always so quiet? Like, I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Right.
And you don't even know what day it is. So
yeah.
But yeah. No, that was my life.
So that is what led your heart and soul to suicide prevention? Or no?
I think it primed me. I think that's probably a better way of saying it. Because at a very young-ish age, there were a lot of places where I wasn't allowed to really have an opinion or be you know, older people have that concept of children should be seen, but even then that's a lot and not heard. So as I got older, I was exposed to I had been exposed to situations where I essentially just kind of accepted whatever was thrown in my face. And multiple things had been said about my father, about his loss, about me because of it, all these things. And as I got older, I just got tired of hearing it. And so I remember one night I went to a friend's house actually, and there was a couple guys there, and I didn't know them very well. And one of them at some point, for some reason, said something about suicide and how it was a sin and how, you go to hell and all this stuff. And I'm not even commenting on that in particular. And I just remember like being very just, I got livid almost. And I was like, okay, so, and where does it say that? Well, it says that. And I'm like, okay, but what exact scripture and all of these things, right? And he had no idea. I've already read the Bible twice to find that language, right?
And you didn't find it.
No, because there's 12 verses that even mention a type of, like, they don't necessarily specifically say suicide, but talk about that happening. And it doesn't condemn. The only one that's even close to is in the jailer, when the jailer was going to attempt. That was the only thing that kind of comes close to it. But there's so many other ones in there that, and I guess Judas was technically negative, but the rest of them are simple, like, and then he died. He fell on his sword and died, or that, and that's it. So,
but that is such a strong cultural sort of belief in this area.
Well, and there's definitely reasons why that was done. I mean, if we're gonna get into history, it was something that was really examined by those in Catholicism and in Christianity. And so Constantine put together a team of people, and they came down and they were like, let's examine the scripture and see. And, so I knew this. That guy had no idea that I'd lost my dad, and he had no idea who he's talking to about that. And so I kind of feel bad now. I'm so sorry, Anthony. I feel bad now looking back, because I was like, I was ready. Like, I realized, okay, well, let's have this conversation. I don't know that I changed his opinion, and that wasn't really my goal, but the purpose for me was, I don't feel like you know enough about this particular issue to kind of condemn an entire people, because how many have we lost? And to tell other people that, because I had adults tell me that at a very young age, and they killed my hope. And because I knew what death was, to the extent I'm not going to see him while I'm alive, right? So then what do you hold on to? Well, you hold on to an eternity of being able to spend time with your father again. And then when people tell you that, well, what is the point then, right? And to me, no one has the right to tell someone else that they shouldn't have hope, or that they shouldn't believe in whatever they want to believe in, because that's really unfair to just destroy someone like that. So that was my purpose in that. And so little things like that would happen. And then eventually I had the opportunity to get involved in the community. And this just happened to be something that I was interested in. And I kind of started looking at it, and I was like, well, I know like one or two things. So, and then I realized, oh, they let me talk. Bad mistake. So that's kind of what happened.
That organically came up in this conversation, because I had someone very close to me die by suicide about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was struggling, but doing what I was supposed to do, but then the different community members started talking about about suicide and hell. So for the first time ever, I went and had a counseling session with a Catholic priest, and it was so eye-opening to me, and I have a lot of respect for this man. But we kind of came to the conclusion that no human really knows where anyone's going, right?
Well, and I agree. And I think there's additional pieces that I found over time. One is, you never know what someone's last thoughts are.
Right.
So for me, I've been blessed to meet a lot of individuals who have survived attempts, and many of them prayed prior to and actually asked for forgiveness for their action. So as a human being, I know that I have no right to judge that situation. Right. And so for me, I was like, you don't know. And I don't know what happened in my dad's final moments. I have no idea what he was thinking or what he did or any of that. Now, beside that point, it was it was systemically structured so that we thought that way. And
Sure.
you know, I'm not saying,
and it might have even been a conspiracy of prevention.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of martyrs.
Yeah.
And when Christianity was very early in its birth, they were like, "Oh, we should tell them this is not good because we're not going to survive." So,
right.
You know, if everyone's like trying to, and I mean, everyone remembers that there were a lot of martyrs that were running around.
We are classic for using fear to control people.
Yeah.
Sorry, human nature.
It is. Well, that's the easiest way to get people to do what you need them to do. So, but I mean, normally I don't go into all the biblical. I'm gonna get in so much trouble after this. So
really,
well, online, anyways. I do a lot in person, but yeah, I just think there's a lot to it. Now, there's some very write it down. Because I'm not gonna say it here, but there's a huge taboo when it comes to the Bible and suicide, and I'll tell you about it after. And people are like, I never even thought of that. I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah. Once again, bear with Susie and I. We are having an organic, informative conversation.
They don't even matter
for World Suicide Prevention Day.
I mean, they matter because they're people, but their opinion.
No, I know, and that's one of the million things I love about Susie, because I'm like, who can be ballsy enough to talk about this with me live? I was like, oh, duh, Susie.
Maybe it's just ignorant. They say
no offense to all the guy friends that I have that work in suicide prevention.
I mean, I'm not scared.
I don't think either one of us are, right? Which can be good and bad.
Yeah.
Which is why we might do some other cool stuff together later. So just, pay attention to that. Has anybody jumped on? Has anybody asked anything? No. Our conversation is too taboo. I did want to throw this out here. Do you recommend that hotline?
So,
or no?
Yes. However, let me explain.
Okay.
To me, this is my opinion, hotlines are the last line of defense.
Okay.
They should not be what we hold everything else to as far as like the standard. They should not be. They are for a person who has absolutely no one else they can call in that moment, cannot access care, so they are critical. They are very, very important, but they are not the ideal, because truly ongoing care is the ideal.
I agree.
So, to me, that the hotlines are important. They are for crisis mitigation, and that person can talk you down and talk you into, a calmer state. And then after that individual that's called, they need to take the next steps and reach out to someone else, preferably someone that they can either have, a virtual relationship with or one that's in person.
Right.
But the importance there is, we really should be promoting ongoing care more so with that, as if you have no one. And there are a ton of people in the world that have no one that they can get in touch with. So
I think it's also a very good idea. And obviously we're making some assumptions here, like we're talking to people who have struggled with thoughts of suicide. But even if you haven't, you could someday. Like, we've talked about these many factors that happen in people's lives. Sometimes we call it like the perfect storm or whatever, but these things do happen. So everybody should be prepared and make sure that their children are prepared. And like what I tell my clients and what I want all of them to know is, even in therapy, I get nervous about asking about suicide. And sometimes, I'll preface it, are you struggling with thoughts of suicide? Because I try to be clear and not say, are you feeling like you're going to harm yourself today? Well, sometimes I ask that too, but that's something totally different, right?
Right.
But I want them to know that when they talk with me about it, it's a conversation and we're going to work through it together. It's not, I'm going to pick up the phone and dial 911 and the ambulance is going to come and take you to a psych hospital. Because actually we know that research shows that that's not actually a really good intervention for suicidality. We love our hospitals. I love you all. I'm so glad you're here. But that is such an extreme and last minute thing, and you're really just getting protection for a short period of time.
Well, and even so, let's look at the process of, right? So I'm the client, right? And I've admitted, like, I'm terrified. Oh my gosh, you asked me this question, and I'm like, okay, I get goosebumps just thinking about, okay, so I've admitted it, right? And then you pick up, you're like, here, I need to call someone. I'm a mandated reporter, right? No, but think about it. Think about the process.
That was
I'm a mandated reporter. I'm going to call my colleague in, and then they're going to start the process, right? You stay here with me if you're good. You stay here with me, and then we'll get you taken, okay? And so in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, am I gonna wear a white jacket? I mean, am I getting, what kind of room, like, what's about to happen? Am I gonna be gone? Can I call someone? These are the questions that are in my head, right? Your friend, your colleague, whatever goes out, someone else, they show up, they're like, they're here to come and get you. Okay. Sometimes we have to handcuff people, right? Depending on the situation.
If the police come,
right.
It is the law that the police must handcuff.
So now I'm taken against my will in a way, right?
Yeah.
And I get into the facility, and all of my things are taken. People start talking about it. All I can think about is the shame and what happens when I come back out, right? So just that process, and that's unfortunately not an unrealistic one, right? That's one that happens. That's not the ideal process.
Right.
There was confusion. There was upheaval. There was massive change. There was a lot of shame and judgment attached to it. And it was very isolating, right?
And a lack of warmth and intimacy.
Right.
It becomes very cold.
It's a very clinical feel.
Very clinical feeling, which is the opposite of what I want any of my clients to ever feel.
Well, and the thing is, if I'm in your office already, I've put a lot of faith in you, right? Because I'm paying you to help me be a better me. And to tell you that takes a lot. And then for you to be like, okay, well, I can do a whole lot of stuff, but that's the one thing I can't do, right? Like, I'm so sorry. I'm really good at this, but I'm going to kick you out the door, and then I'll see you in 4 weeks after you get out, maybe, right? And then I'm like, well, crap, man, I thought you were the expert.
Right.
I trusted you with that, and now what do I do, right? And then I get over there, and I don't have safety and security like I would at my house or even in your office anymore.
Or comfort.
Exactly. And so, do I want to come back to you after that? Probably. It's going to be like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that, right?
And more likely, they're then not going to share their suicidal feelings.
Of course not.
Maybe to anyone.
In the past month, I've had 3 specific individuals ask, if I tell them this, are they going to report it immediately? And I'm just like, man, that sucks. That's the first thought that they have.
I honestly do not. Obviously, I'm a mandated reporter, but I have never in my 20-something years of doing this felt that I had an obligation to pick up the phone and call. I felt like I have the obligation to support that person and to make a plan and stick with them until they're safe. And that's another shout out to my wonderful clients who are often patient with me, because I'm not going to be like, oh, your time's up, I gotta call you an ambulance because I got my 3 o'clock, good luck. No, that's not happening. Right? Like, I will call my next client or have Tess call my next client, say, Angela's dealing with a crisis. Are you okay? Blah, blah, blah. Make sure that person's okay. And then I'm going to make a plan with the person in front of me who's struggling with that and make sure that they will talk to me about it again. Because I would never want them to feel that. Now, sometimes my clients do go inpatient.
Right.
Because we had that discussion and that's what they want, you know? So I try to describe to them realistically about how it's going to look.
Well, and that's the thing, that process isn't that it's not necessary, right? It's not that we don't ever need it. We do. There are times when we need it. But it definitely has a lot of holes and gaps in it.
I think it's sort of like what you're saying about that hotline, right? There's a need for it, but it doesn't need to be your first line of defense, so to speak.
Right.
Here
Well,
I am
and it's
talking like a
easy.
Marine.
That's a lazy resource, right? For us. I mean, let's be honest. Right? You're like, oh, you need help? 800-273. You know, and they're like, okay, but I asked you for help. And you're like, no, I got stuff to do, man. Like, that's a volunteer. They're there because they want to be there. And that's wonderful for those people that are volunteering. But for me, it's like, okay, well, here you go, right? And then they're like, but like I wanted some like longer term help. And you're like, oh, yeah, well, good luck with that, right? So, but that process, a lot of it is we have to set expectations. We have to do better. We have to make sure that we're managing those concerns and that change, and that we're setting people up for success, because that is traumatizing. And
oh my gosh,
isn't that
yes.
kind of going against everything that we're supposed to be doing, which is providing care, trauma-informed care, providing suicide prevention? And also the research shows that in those situations, when those individuals go to that facility, that is their highest risk point while they are there. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you a lot of it has to be attached to that process itself. Mm-hmm. It's broken and we need to fix it. And a lot of that is simple stuff, though. Honestly, it's like hey,
we were saying, the milieu.
Tell the milieu, but let's set expectations. Yeah. Let's literally walk through what could happen with someone. Let's answer questions. Let's make sure that we have tried to deal with as much fear and uncertainty as possible, and given them options, because a lot of times these people feel as though they have no control, and so you're going to take absolutely everything from them and then expect them to feel better.
I think thoughts of suicide are so painful, and when you are stuck in those thoughts, you are very vulnerable. And I think that people really need to step up, whatever we want to call it, trauma-informed care, or being cautious, or not be a dick in that moment of time, because nobody deserves that.
I agree.
And sometimes there is that, oh, you're being selfish, oh, you're seeking attention. I have never in my career had somebody come in here and sit on my couch, talk about being suicidal for freaking attention. I've never seen it. Maybe it exists.
But that's that bias. Now, and there are spaces. I mean, there definitely are spaces where that happens, but that's the complexity of suicide. And that's where it's difficult for others, because you're trained, right? You have education, and yet the issue of suicide in itself has many different components in it, right? Yes. So you have prevention, that's a lot of awareness, education, things like that. If we were in a jail setting, there's definitely someone in there that is using that as a manipulation tool, right?
Maybe. Yeah.
It's less common in the general public. It definitely is. Yeah. And so I think
because I'm actually not familiar with that. I know you spent a lot more time with that population, with education.
Well, and it's not just about that particular population, but there are definitely there's several different types of suicidality, and so that is a component. It does happen out in the world. It's like you're talking about, psychopaths, antisocials. Those are very uncommon, and so it can happen. Because anything can happen, right? But to say that they're just wanting attention, no, that's our bias. That's us saying, well, if I say that that's what's going on, then I don't need to step into it. I don't need to do anything, and I can just say that they're doing that because they need they're crazy, they need help, right? But obviously they're doing it because they want everyone to pay attention to them. And if I pay attention to them, I'm just giving them what they want, right? So I should just not do it. Right. And everybody's better off that way, because we constantly write checks so that we can check out of situations, right? We're like, you just, no, you try to manipulate me. I'm good, thank you. And it's like, seriously? Really? Sorry, I've been like ranting. People are gonna be like, oh, she's crazy.
No, I think it's all good stuff. And like you said, there's so many different overlying factors. Even in our little DSM-5 that I love to talk about, there's no diagnosis for suicidality.
Now, it may be in the next round.
I hope it is.
I'm hoping so too.
I hope it is.
But you're right, and that's the frustrating thing is too that it's mostly attached to another issue, right?
Right.
Depression, anxiety, whatever.
Yeah.
It really should be its own issue.
I agree with that.
And that's how I feel about
But
it.
I will say, in my experience, everyone that I have worked with has had a trauma piece. I have a lot of my people with PTSD. And suicidality is not even one of the qualifying factors for PTSD, but excessive guilt and shame and isolation and depersonalization, all of that is. But I would say when people with PTSD have the highest, most thoughts of suicidality and borderline personality disorder, which is another whole topic for another show. But it's two diagnoses that suffer from extreme pain and self-harm.
Well, and the way that
intense emotions.
I think about it is, if it were in terms of the DSM-5 and diagnosis, I think suicide is its own issue, and it's definitely a co-occurring, because you often see it with.
Right.
And so, that's the difficulty for me as in what I do is I recommend people to constantly, who's your therapist, who's your counselor, who's your social worker, who's your mental health people. And yet a lot of the ones that I know of are very fearful of that issue, and so they don't ever put it on
the clients,
the therapist, and they don't put it on the table, and
like they don't talk about it, or they don't
know how to dive into it, and it's not even about
that is not good
documentation sometimes. And I'm not saying there's tons and tons that are great at it and deal with it, but some of them are just like, I did an assessment, I did the reporting, they went off, they're good, right?
That's sad. That breaks my heart.
Well, and it's hard because if we're not able to do that, and everyone specializes. I'm not expecting everyone to be specialized in everything. You just can't. But we need those people who are specialized in this, because we have a lot of people who are chronically suicidal. And that acute situation will never help them, ever. It will not fix it. So until we have those who can offer chronic care for suicidality, what are we going to do for those people?
No, I think that every therapist should be trained in some, and even our medical professionals like doctors or any type of professional provider should have some basic knowledge. I mean, I keep bringing up assist because that's the only thing I know, but I know you have 20 others that are probably better. But some type of training of, would it be a first aid responder? I mean, a suicide first aid responder? How would it even work?
The way that I look at training is it should be customized, catered, just like any other type of care.
Yeah.
And so in certain situations, if you're in a crisis situation, then yes, a type of psychological first aid or those kinds of things work. But in the medical system, like if you're in an emergency room, then really triaging is the best option, and then getting them, to the next person. For those who are therapists, I feel that the collaborative approach to managing suicide is the best, and it's a program it's a best practice as of right now. It's not an evidence-based. They're working on that, but essentially, you come in, I'm the client, and I tell you I'm suicidal, right? And you're like, okay, let's work through this, right? And so through that process, we actually document everything, and I kind of start self-monitoring. So what is the antecedent that brings me here, right? What is the triggering thing that kind of sets me over the edge? And then we come back in a few weeks and we do another kind of work through, and then we compare. And so essentially you're creating a plan with this individual that they are 100% involved in and have created with you, right?
Yeah, and it is on the table
the whole time.
Yes.
It is never okay, this is suicide, we're gonna put it over here and let's talk about your trauma, right?
Yeah.
No, this is a component of that, right? So we dig into it and we say, how are your suicidal thoughts right now? How have you been feeling about that? And it's not, are you still having them, right? It's not that. It's, tell me about it. Let's figure it out. Let's work through it. It's a process. There's a lot that's raveled up. Let's untangle it. Yeah. And it's problem solving, right?
Problem solving is a big core key component of of therapy. It's good. I mean, really, they say with most interventions like this, you're pulling in at least four different interventions, right? You're pulling in that stuff with the, whatever, with the suicide, you're doing some problem solving, you're doing some mindfulness or DBT to get them to learn how to like calm down so they can at least talk to you,
right.
Reflective statements, it's like CBT. That's why therapists, you really have to be trained. I know we get like annoyed at all the training that we do, but I think that's why it's important for us to keep on our toes.
I agree
with that.
Well, and I think that the thing, I had someone comment on something the other day and said, I had shared that resource, and they're like, even 15 years ago, things were changing. And I'm like, we are still, even in suicidology, new information is coming out every year. Every year, there are things that are shifting the way that we've been talking about things and making us pause and realize, maybe that wasn't the best way. Let's do it a little differently now, right? And so for me, the thing I feel lucky about is I get to learn all of that. I get to constantly find out what's coming out, find out new approaches, find out new resources. How much time do you really have to dedicate to doing that when you're seeing people? Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't.
Right.
I mean, that's why it's important to sign up for trainings and to, for people like me to rely on people like you to get that information. Like when we walked in here, like telling Susie, I was like, I deal with this every day, but I don't know any of the research or the numbers. I'm relying on you because that's what you do, right?
Right. Well, and that's my hope is I'm not the solution, right? But I know things, let me share them with you because you guys are the solution. You guys are the solution. You guys are the ones we need to have these skills and to be trained in these things because people need to be coming to you. And they don't need to be coming to you when they're in crisis. They need to be coming to you prior to that, right? So when we work together and I'm telling people, like, you guys need therapy, I need therapy, everyone needs therapy, right? I don't want to send people to people that are not trained and not able to handle this. Or at least, as an individual professional, say, I specialize in this, but I know this person that specializes in that. And they can get you there because you can't be able to do everything.
No, I agree. Yeah, and that's why I've built my practice a little bit more and want to keep growing it because they're trained in neurotherapies, for example, which are great for trauma and suicidality, but that's another whole big piece that I just have not had time to get to that. And so, and like you said, I think you called it the community approach, where you're
the collaborative.
Collaborative, yeah, and I'm a big believer in that. That's why I have a PCP I use. I have psych that I use. Like it's
well, and I think too that we forget that you're a person and you're the professional.
Yeah.
And it's not fair for us to put everything on you either. And so, if you have stronger networks and if you have this person, me, I'm the client, I am in need and I am surrounded by care, it's not all on you either. No. And then you can help more people that way. Because we're lifting up together.
Yeah,
and that's the way it's supposed to be built.
Yeah.
But our systems are outdated. Our policies are outdated. Our protocols are outdated. And we're still learning a lot about the science behind some of these issues and better approaches for them. So to me, that just means like, hey, if you want to do trauma-informed care, let's do it. But we got to touch your policies. I got to look at them. Let's fix it. Let's do this. Let's do that. Right? Otherwise, I mean, you're paying me, hopefully, paying me for nothing. Right? It's just a waste of my time. It's a waste of your time. Yeah. It's just not even.
I mean, they think they're going to be able to put that on their website and that
it's that box they checked.
Yeah, that they have trauma-informed care, but it's not what's being employed in the milieu.
Right. Well, Amazon did a terrible job recently where they tried to add a component of wellness, right, for employee wellness. I think a lot of it had to do with all of the way they've been, dealing with employees lately. And so people were complaining. They're like, it's ridiculous because we have no time to actually access this. They've given us this stuff, right? And maybe the concept is great. Maybe the tools are even great. But we have to clock out in order to get into it. And by the time I've clocked out, I'm ready to go home, right? And I'm just
and
like,
deal with all those stressors
right, that
are
were
leading to
that was work stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And it's not fair that I should have to bring that home and deal with it at home.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's just ironic because it's like, oh, you put how much money and time into that, and yet we didn't even think it through as far as like, is this really the way that we're trying to apply this? Is this actually going to make a difference? No one's going to do it. They're not going to do it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, fun stuff.
I know. Well, we have been I feel like we could keep talking like another hour, but it has been, I think, close to an hour, which is a long time for you guys to be focused on us talking about suicide.
We're wearing bright colors, though.
We are. Yeah. But thank you all for joining. Please like, share, and follow both of us, wonderful ladies. And I've got some giveaways. It's almost beanie time. I want it to be full. So if you like and share our live, you'll be in drawing for that. A t-shirt. Do we have anything else that I need to add? No, I'm looking at Tess. Everybody knows that I own face-to-face therapy, but Tess is the boss. She keeps me in line with everything. And it was so great to see you.
Thank you for having me again.
And I hope that we did a good job today representing World Suicide Prevention Day. I'm not going to even give out those 1-800 numbers today.
I mean, I feel like we should.
You think we should give out the numbers?
For the United States, they've actually shifted, and it's 988 now.
Oh,
I actually called it.
You did it, and
I called it two weeks ago,
okay.
And there's an automated voice.
Okay.
And then she said something and was like, I am now directing you to. And I was like, click. Okay, I just want to make sure it was.
Okay, well, I will give a shout out to some of our local politicians who supported that. I'm not going to drop their names right now. But I am thankful for you for supporting that. Speaking of politics, since I brought it up, mental health is a bipartisan concept. So I really want everyone to focus on that and unify, right?
And we need legislation in the state of Arkansas for suicide prevention that will include funding. Our state is underfunded out of all of the 50 states, and I'm tired of it. So I'm saying that out loud. I want you all to start advocating for funding for suicide prevention for Arkansas.
Let's do that.
Yeah. I'm at that point. I'm just going to start knocking on doors.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, like let's just go to the Capitol and
let's go right
now.
Talk
to some lobbyists who might be able to help us. Won't drop those names either, but let's get to work on that, Susie.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.